Hi viewers, in this video I will show you how I replace the CVT fluid, the strainer, the pan gasket and the CVT fluid filter on my 2009 Jeep Patriot 2.4 liter.
First, the vehicle was safely jacked up and secured with jack stands and wheel chocks. After, I removed the wheel on the left-hand side and the engine splash shield. Here you can see the side of the CVT transaxle with the pan and the drain plug. The fluid pan is held in place with 18 small bolts and 2 dowel pins. To gain access to the CVT fluid filter, the battery and the battery tray had to be removed. The filter is located in the transaxle, just behind the CVT fluid cooler. 4 bolts are used to hold the CVT cooler in place. Note, at the end of 2009, this assembly was replaced with a cooler bypass valve. Since my transaxle was equipped with this bigger part, the lower bolts were difficult to reach. Before draining any CVT fluid from the transaxle, I made sure the fluid was not too hot in order to work more safely. To avoid any fluid spill, I positioned the oil pan very close to the drain plug. To begin draining the CVT fluid, I used a 10 mm hexagonal bit with a ratchet to undo the drain plug. The tube cap was also removed to vent the transaxle. Later, when only a little bit of fluid was dripping, I refitted and snug tightened the drain plug. Next, to finish draining the fluid from the pan, I loosened all the bolts holding the pan. It was not necessary, but to avoid making a mess during the second step, I used the larger tray to collect the remaining fluid. I also installed a car jack to hold the pan. I removed 17 bolts, but I kept one loosely fastened for safety. Then I lowered the jack a little bit to safely drain the rest of the fluid. Later, when there was only a few drops left, I undid the last bolt and I removed the pan. The gasket was still stuck on the base of the transaxle. I checked the pan and I didn't see any metal fragment. I also checked the 2 magnets and I didn't feel any hard particle in the sludge. I used a couple of rags to remove most of the dirt and I inspected the pan. The pan was still in good condition. Later, I emptied the tray in the oil pan and I used all bottles to measure the quantity of fluid that was drained from the transaxle. While most of the CVT fluid was out of the transaxle, it was then a good time to undo the 4 bolts holding the CVT fluid cooler and remove the fluid filter. There was more room to undo the upper bolts, but the rear one was quite difficult to unscrew due to corrosion. The fluid cooler was put aside to ease the work. Next, I pulled out the filter located in the transaxle. You can see the accumulation of dirt on the pleats. In this view, I used a small mirror to show the filter seal that had to be removed. There is also an O-ring on the fluid cooler that should normally be replaced. I went back under the vehicle. I undid the 3 bolts and I removed the fluid strainer. The gasket was the original metallic one and was easy to remove with a common scraper. As you can see, the body valve was dirt-free. I cleaned the contact surface at the base of the transaxle to make sure the new gasket would seal properly. When I went to buy the CVT replacement parts, I brought the old gasket and some pictures to compare the original parts with the replacement ones. Once I was back with the parts, I cleaned the contact surface under the transaxle with brake cleaner. After that, I installed the new strainer. First, I fastened the 2 short bolts, then I installed the long one. The torque was set to 8 Nm. I also used some brake cleaner to clean the fluid pan. For optimal result, lint-free cloth can be used. Since I'm planning to keep my Jeep only a few more years, I bought aftermarket parts like this rubber gasket. To hold the gasket in place during the installation, I simply folded some cable ties and I inserted them in some holes, but not in the dowel pin holes. The two magnets were put back in place just before the final installation. Once under the vehicle, I slowly positioned the pan. When the two dowel pins were properly inserted in the pan, the cable ties were easily removed. Again, I used a jack to hold the pan in place. I didn't find any information on how to refit the bolts. But I began with the four corners, and after I fastened the rest of the bolts. Because the torque specification was calculated for a metal gasket and I was using a rubber gasket, I estimated it would be safer to fasten the bolts by applying a two-stage torque procedure. The first pass was set to 5 Nm, and the second pass was set to 8 Nm. After, it was time to install the new filter. Note, I cleaned and reinstalled the original O-ring with a coat of CVT fluid because it was still in good condition and I was confident it would seal properly. The surface of the fluid cooler was cleaned up and I refitted the O-ring in the groove. Soon after, the fluid filter and the rubber seal were in place. The torque for the 4 bolts was set to 4 Nm. Original Mopar CVTF plus 4 fluid or certified CVTF plus 4 fluid must be used to refill the CVT transaxle. Note, the Mopar CVT fluid is green. To know the color of the aftermarket CVTF plus 4 fluids, search for and read the safety data sheets available online. Soon after, I reinstalled the battery. Since I drained 6.4 liters from my transaxle, I added the same quantity to fill it up. Once the fluid was in the transaxle, I started the engine and I let it run at idle speed in park position for a couple of minutes. While the engine was still running, I shifted through all the transmission lever positions several times. This ensured a proper fluid flow in the transaxle. After, I parked the vehicle on a level surface with the parking brake engaged and the wheel chocks installed. I let the shifter in the park position while the engine was still idling. I connected my scan tool on the OBD II DLC connector. The temperature information can be obtained by accessing the transaxle control module live data menu under the ATF temperature selection. Note, when checking the fluid level, the tip of the dipstick must touch the bottom of the pan. The dipstick is also longer than the fill tube. When I'm checking the fluid level, I find it more precise to adjust the quantity of fluid when the temperature is above 110 degrees Fahrenheit. At 102 degrees Fahrenheit, the level was at 33 millimeters. At 113 degrees Fahrenheit, the level was at 34 millimeters. At 127 degrees Fahrenheit, the level was still in the middle range at 36 millimeters. To properly check the CVT fluid level in the transaxle, I used the CVT transmission field graph available online. The filler cap was put back on and soon after I tested the vehicle on the road. Everything looked fine and I did not find any fluid leak when I came back. The next day I rechecked the level and it was still within the range.
For those who don't have a compatible scan tool, it is also possible to know the temperature of the CVT pan with an infrared thermometer.